As a civilization, we're only just beginning to wake up to the concept of mental health and the integral role it plays in governing each of our daily lives. As actors, athletes, musicians, and even world leaders begin to open up about their battles with mental health, we're encouraged not to suffer in silence, to speak out, check in, raise awareness, and end stigma. The human blights of depression, anxiety, panic, delusion, and self-harm that have been swept under the carpet for centuries are for the first time being readily acknowledged and confronted. But despite mental illness claiming a life every 40 seconds and the WHO declaring suicide a public health emergency, the subject remains heavily shrouded in prejudice, suspicion, awkwardness, and shame. Mental illness does not discriminate by race, nationality, age, or social class. And in the current climate of isolation and uncertainty, we are all at risk of running across this invisible and misunderstood beast. How then do we as societies build support networks and coping mechanisms to ensure that we and future generations do not fall victim to the same enemy? In this episode, I'm joined by the handsome and hilarious Aaron Stadlin-Robbie, the founder of Talking Mental. Together we discuss his challenges with mental illness, Hong Kong and its pitfalls, the spectrum of mental health, the implications of the pandemic, the disparity between physical and mental illness, young people and their uncertain future, mental well-being as a performance enhancer, appealing to masculinity, the normalisation of mental health discussion, the future of mental health, and a whole load more. I'm Harry Barter and you're listening to Barter in the Booth. Okay, so A-Rob, thank you for being guest number 3 on Barter in the Booth.
That's what they say. Third time is the, what do they say? Third time's the charm?
Is the charm, yeah. 3 is the magic number for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
No, the pleasure's all mine. We've been talking about doing this for such a long time. It's so great to finally get you here.
Yeah. Friday here in Hong Kong. So please excuse the fact that I do have a Peroni in hand.
That's all right. I had no time to go to the shop, so I'm on the whiskey and Tropicana, which is not even a drink, hey, but you know, needs must.
It's some things haven't changed.
Yeah, as much as I'm very excited to have you on, I am a little bit gutted that it's going to be audio only because the stosh that you're currently rocking is absolutely outstanding.
It's called the extended runway because you only see to the chin, but then when I tilt up, it carries on down.
It carries on going. Have you seen the one that goes all the way into the chest hair?
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I reckon I'd call it the village people. I think that's the vibe.
Yeah.
So how is the Movember efforts going?
It's good, mate. Unfortunately, there's a lot of events being cancelled, obviously due to what's been happening this year. So it's the efforts haven't been as powerful, but I think people are still any excuse to grow the Mo is a good one. So mate, it's going well.
Yeah, I think this is the first time in a few years I haven't done it, but I am going to a fancy dress party on Saturday as Magnum PI, so I'll be with you with the stosh for the last couple of days of November.
That's all that matters.
Yeah. And also I saw you've recently been doing your walk around the whole of Hong Kong, right?
Yeah.
How was that?
Mate, it was incredible. Actually, as of yesterday morning, we received the final edit of the mini documentary, which we filmed with regards to the whole walk and talk. So we, one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we did was to document it properly. And we were very fortunate to find a very talented video producer who was our cameraman and created something quite amazing, which I'm super proud of. So I got to see that in terms of the full final edit yesterday, and it was quite cool to relive it.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. Can't wait to see it. So when's that coming out?
I'm doing a screening this Thursday with a few mates just to get a few eyeballs on it. And then we're showing it to the sponsors and to potential sponsors, as well as potentially some networks. And during that time, we'll push it out. So I reckon a couple of weeks, maybe.
Yeah, can't wait to see it. So for the people listening that might not know you, if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about your story and what led you to the origins of Talking Mental.
Right. Well, for the people who don't know me, which shame on you,
You can go. You
Barter
can
and
go
the booth listeners.
into as much or as little detail as you like.
Yeah, to all you Barter and the booth listeners. Yeah. Well, my name's Aaron. I grew up here in Hong Kong. Kiwi dad, Hong Kong mum, and I'll skip through my childhood and fast forward up into where I had my first mental breakdown, because that's what you've got me on here for.
It's always a good place to start.
Yeah. And the origins of Talking Mental really started when back in 2012, 2013, I had my first panic attack. No idea what it was. I was living in Shanghai at the time, and basically trying to, I won't go into, maybe we can talk about it a bit later. I won't go into sort of what a panic attack feels like, but I'll kind of just run through the timeline. Had my first panic attack, was misdiagnosed basically in Shanghai for the first year, and then came back to Hong Kong, and through a connection of my mum, found a psychiatrist here who basically diagnosed me within 5 minutes of meeting him, and was like, yeah, you're a typical case. This happens all the time. And I was kind of blown away from going from a thing that I thought I was suffering on my own to just something that you found out within 5 minutes was pretty normal and pretty common. From that space, really try to combat what I was going through. It took me a few years, and the more educated I got around the topic, the easier it was to talk about, the more I could compare it to a physical injury. And then the more I talked about it, the more it helped me. And I'd always wanted to do my own project, and that started Talking Mental. And I thought, do something that's forces you to speak out more about it. It helps you. But more of the motivation was actually to, it was a good excuse to meet and interview people that I couldn't afford to go and meet. Psychiatrists cost a lot of money to go and see. So I was like, oh, I don't have enough money to go and see them. But if I have a podcast, they will come on for free. And so that was the premise of doing it to begin with. And then from there, I was just creating content around it. And however, I wasn't really creating content with an actual end in sight. There wasn't anything I was creating for. And it wasn't until I was fortunate enough to go to Copenhagen and see, for a mental health conference, see how different countries are dealing with it, what the pain points were. I came back to Hong Kong, read this document that the government had out, basically highlighting what the issues were. And through that, I understood what the problems were. And it was when I found out what the problems were in society that I actually knew how to then create content for those pain points. And since then, that's how kind of Talking Mental's now been born. So to kind of give people a rough idea of what we do, I kind of look at it in two ways. One way, which is our quote unquote revenue maker, we work with clients, whether that's schools or corporates, and creating bespoke digital content for them, which normally is either a podcast or a video podcast with regards to topics and themes that is suitable to them. So for example, with schools, I will work with the students to find out what they want to speak about, and then I will bring experts in and to get them involved so that the conversation it's more engaging. It's their voice. So that's our revenue model. We've done that with Lululemon, with HSBC. We've done that from a client perspective as well as school perspective. That's what kind of pays the bills. The other side of it is the content side, which I give out in terms of for free for the public, and that's more about giving the public access to things that they don't have access to. So that's through the podcast that I do, as well as you mentioned it earlier, is the walk and talk, which is providing accessibility to people who can't get access. So that's what we do. That's how we're Talking Mental is. And I'm sitting in the office right now, in one of those co-working spaces, and trying to figure it all out, man.
Well, I'm great to hear it's going so well, because I think as I was leaving Hong Kong, you were just about to launch Talking Mental. So all these things were still completely unknown. I know you put so much time and so much effort into putting them together. And it's been so nice to be able to sit from a distance and just, watch your baby grow, bigger and bigger and more successful. And I am interested in talking about Hong Kong because it's such a unique place, and it just has such a unique culture and such a unique mixture of people. And The place itself, although it can be very picturesque, it's surrounded by beaches, it's surrounded by mountains, it's got gorgeous nature. I think the city itself can be a very intense place to live. It's densely packed, it's got a tropical climate. And do you think there is something about living in Hong Kong and the Hong Kong lifestyle that can breed anxiety or breed mental health issues?
For sure. Absolutely. There is a side of Hong Kong, which is, and which we actually showcase a lot in the walk and talk, is actually we have so many avenues to help relieve stress. Like we do have beaches, we have amazing ways to be on the water. It's like very different to any kind of metropolis city. You don't get what we have. It's a very unique city in that sense, where we have the ability to go out and enjoy things like being in nature. But yes, absolutely. But I think it's that in Hong Kong, it really stems from the fact, more societally in terms of and culturally, how we are raised locally, I would say, is probably the biggest issue. It's a very fast-paced society. Everybody is running a rat race, and in Hong Kong we pride ourselves off being busy. If you're not busy, you're not doing the right thing, and it starts from a young age here in Hong Kong. So culturally, there is a big problem. Yeah, massively.
I think it's very similar to Japan in that sense, in that it's very much a culture of work hard, play hard, and maybe don't open up about how you're feeling. If you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling worried about things, it's very much you just get on with it. And I think that's amplified even more in Hong Kong because of such a large expat community. I mean, we know more than anyone that there is a certain expat community of work hard, play hard, heavy boozing, late nights, socializing to the extreme. And as great as that can be, I think eventually it can burn you out, right? When you're working such long hours, and then in your off time you're also socializing to such an extreme. It really does take its toll after a while.
Yeah, well, I think you're talking about Hong Kong in two different lights. Like, I think when you were talking about the city, you're really talking about it from an expat perspective. The expat lifestyle and the local lifestyle are very different.
Yeah.
The local lifestyle, if as an expat coming into Hong Kong, you won't see the local side of it. And it's a very out of sight, out of mind. It's really interesting, man, when you get to really understand what's happening from a local perspective and what's happening in some of these areas. Is very different to what we see in terms of if you were to say a quote unquote expat life. Now, if we're just talking about the expat life, sure, it's the banking life of the expat, where they work hard, quote unquote, work hard, play hard, basically just boozing till you can't walk, and drugs, everything, right? It's a city that's high in energy, and it's like a playground for people. But the one thing though, bro, is like expats, they come and go in this city.
Yeah.
And I don't, when I look at the expat side of it, I think it's right that there is a very high end work hard, play hard. The boozing scene doesn't help with your mental health in that sense, and it can really add to it. But in the same light, the resources for mental health from an expat perspective are more abundant. There's more access to these sort of psychologists, psychiatrists, and help in general. If you go to the local side of stuff, it's completely different. There's not that kind of booze up life in the local side of it.
Yeah.
And on the other side as well, there's no, it's very hard to find help.
And why is that? Is that a sort of cultural thing, in that people aren't as ready to talk about mental health, or is that a sort of economic difference between the two groups?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there's to give people an understanding of in terms of context of what mental health in Hong Kong's like. To find help, you have two very different resources. You have the private sector, which is very expensive, and you have the public sector, which is overly crowded to the point where you have to wait potentially up to 2 years to even get an appointment. And I heard through a local psychiatrist here that the average time spent with a psychiatrist or psychologist when you see them is 60 seconds. So what can you really do in 60 seconds? Take these drugs, right? This will help cover everything. It's kind of Band-Aid, right? So that's the public system. No one in Hong Kong really can really afford a $2,000 per hour session with a private psychologist. So that's really inaccessible. The public system is not accessible because you have a huge waiting line. And to give you a bit of a story, if you, or a bit of insight, they break it down between urgent, semi-urgent, and I think I can't remember exactly what the bottom one is. It's basically in 3 tiers of how much time you have to spend, you have to wait before you go into seek help. So urgent is someone who, let's say, is trying to commit suicide or trying to take their own life. Semi-urgent is people potentially, you know, it's a kind of gray area. It's like, you know, have they tried that? They might be calling pieces like, hey, I'm thinking about trying, you know, all this kind of stuff. And the other side of it is, you know, ring, ring, I just want to, hey, I would love to book in a time with a psychologist. Okay, you know, wait. Now, if you're that point of trying to commit suicide and you're in that urgent case, if you go and see a private doctor once, and then it's too expensive and you try to go back to the public system, by seeing a private psychologist once, you immediately go down into semi-urgent. So they deem you like you've fixed a little bit of the problem. So imagine someone trying to take their own life has frantically gone and trying to find help because they're desperate. They see someone private, then they go to try the public system because they don't have enough money to, and then now you've put into semi-urgent, which you have to maybe wait 25 weeks.
So basically you're just stuck in limbo between the two systems, right?
Yeah.
I talked about that with my guest last week when we were talking about alcoholism. We were talking about how for so many people, they don't get help until they absolutely hit rock bottom. Like you say, when people are trying to take their own life, when actually it seems like the best way to prevent these things is to catch it early, right? Like with anything, and be able to see people and speak to people and start to work through your problems before they really have a negative impact on your life.
Yeah, and it was kind of, I guess it was also to even, I guess, finish up the question that you even asked last time, is why is it a problem? Is societally, there's no education around it. There's no education around what actually is going on. And that leads to a stigma of speaking about it at home, because unfortunately the case of mental health right now is considered, you're just considered crazy. So that's the spectrum. It's you're fine, and then mental health, boom, crazy. So nobody speaks about it because they don't understand what the signs are. If you don't know what the signs are, you don't know how to speak about it. And this is a huge problem. This is the biggest problem. When you talk about physical health, not everybody waits until they're so clinically obese that they can't walk before they go to the gym. It doesn't exist. If you were to go to a gym in Hong Kong or anywhere around the world, not every single person is so obese that they can't walk. But in the mental sphere, that's exactly what we do. We wait until it's the worst possible time before you find help. And I'll give you an example of why this is the case. The psychiatric wards in Hong Kong are horrible. So let's say you go into the public system, you call the ambulance, try to take your life, you're suffering from depression. You go into the public psychiatric wards. In these wards, you get put in the same ward as somebody who's someone from schizophrenia, is seeing things, like someone who's really lost their mind. It's like if I was to say, you put someone in a physical hospital who's twisted their ankle or have fractured their ankle in the same ward as someone who's having open heart surgery. You'd be like, why am I in here? This is weird. Why am I in the same fucking room? Sorry, I don't know if I can swear.
No, mate, swear as much as you like.
Why am
this
I
is Barter in the booth. We love it.
That's true. I don't know why I'm in the same room as someone who has open heart surgery. It's like you wouldn't put someone there, but with mental health, you are lumped there. So now that person who's suffering from depression is literally thinking, holy shit, I am as crazy as, like, maybe I am this crazy. So it's literally, that is mental health.
Yeah.
And that's nuts. And so because of that and the lack of education around it, nobody talks about it, because that's the only thing that you directly correlate with mental health.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I know to relate it again to the conversation we had last week, because obviously talking about mental health and alcoholism, they are quite linked. And again, we have this idea with booze is that people are either, you know, alcoholics, they're passing out in the street, pissing their pants, or they're fine. And it sounds very similar in this case, in that people are either, like you say, completely mental, for want of a better word, or everyone's fine, when actually in reality there's a spectrum of, you know, a million different problems that people suffer from in different extents.
Bro, you literally hit the nail on the head. So for example, I did a webinar with HSBC recently, and it's so common. All of these talks, they will always introduce it by stating a fact. 1 in 6 of us deal with mental health issues, right? I'm like, look, let's eliminate that. 6 out of 6 of us deal with it. It's just where you are on the spectrum. Yeah. So now it's true that 1 out of 6 of us might deal with severe mental health issues, but let's just get this straight. 6 out of 6 of us deal with mental health issues. It's where you are. Once we can get that out of the way, we all go, okay, cool. So we all are on the spectrum. Now it's easier to talk about it. Now it's like, oh, we all have issues. Let's talk about it. It's like physical health. It's like we all have a body. We're all dealing with some sort of level of spectrum of how our bodies are doing.
No one lives 80 years without having a cold ever. Do you know what I mean?
No one lives 80 years with a 6-pack the whole time.
except Arnie, mate. He's still going for it.
That's fucking true.
But no, that's so interesting when you do compare it to physical health. It makes you realize how stupid our perception of mental health is. The idea that some people are perfectly well all of the time, because that's really just not the case, is it?
It's literally impossible.
Yeah. And I think the more we start to talk and think about mental health in the same way of physical health, in that it can inflict anyone at any time, regardless of how well you look after yourself. In the same way that, you know, there are professional athletes that get cancer, you know, or get all manner of terrible diseases, and it's not necessarily related to their lifestyle. And it's the same with mental health, right? Just because you feel okay 1 minute, and, you know, you might be someone who looks after themselves physically and has a good social life, it doesn't mean that you can't suddenly be struck with a bout of mental illness. And that was why it was so interesting to hear your story, and why I think your story is so down to earth is because, you know, anyone who's met you will know that you're very charismatic. You seem like a very positive person. You have a lot of friends around you. So if I had to make a list of people I know that would have suffered from mental health, you would have been way bottom of that list. I never would have expected it, which is why it's so refreshing to hear you talk about the challenges that you've been through.
Yeah, but I also think it's the perception, right? I think people, it's a basic perception of mental health. Like, even hearing your comment is like direct correlation of happiness and charismatic and outgoingness equals not having mental health issues. Like, again, it kind of goes back to the point of everybody does. So it's just eliminating that conversation. Now there are different types of mental health issues, right? So I don't deal with depression very much. My side of it is more of the panic attacks and the anxiety. When I speak to someone who's suffering from bipolar, it's very different to what I'm going through. Yeah. So it's not like mental health is one umbrella. And I think that's super important for people to realize. It's a different, I guess when I refer to a physical, it's a different injury, you know. Just because having a broken leg and a broken collarbone, they're different injuries, but you wouldn't say someone's like, you address the problem differently. And I think that's what people need to understand.
Yeah, so true, so true. So one thing I did want to talk to you about, I feel like it's all anyone's talking about at the moment, but I feel like we can't talk about mental health without addressing the elephant in the room, which is obviously the COVID pandemic and how that's affected everyone's life. And, you know, the figures that are coming out are so striking about the rise in mental health and things like self-harm, you know, neglect, all this sort of thing, because people have had their social lives taken away. They've had their support networks taken away from them. And in certain cases, people are also just being confined to their homes. And I can't help but feel that that's going to be a big problem in the future in terms of a rise in mental illness. And especially in Hong Kong, where, you know, it must be one of the toughest places in the world to be confined indoors, because everyone lives in such tiny living spaces. I can't even imagine, you know, where I know I was a student, but where I was living in Hong Kong was like a shoebox. And if I had to do lockdown in there, man, yeah, that would have been like the bloody cold turkey train spotting scene. Like it would not have been, it would not have been
this
fun.
random, this is this bed with this overly massive British guy who's like twice the size of your bed, like crying.
It was hilarious. It was a bunk bed as well. I had to climb a little ladder to get up to it.
The chicks must have loved that.
It was absurd. It was absolutely absurd. Look, that's the one thing. The one thing I don't miss about Hong Kong is, having to fold,
shagging on the top bunk,
having to fold myself into bed every night. It was completely ridiculous. But in all seriousness, you know, that is a reality for some people, and to be locked down or, you know, to be confined indoors like that it can't be healthy.
Look, COVID has put a massive magnifying glass over mental health issues, right? We were always dealing with mental health issues, not just as a society for ages, but it's now put a magnifying glass on everything. You think about all the different elements of what's causing anxiety, right? Just the nature of the unknown is what, like, fear of the unknown is literally what causes anxiety, right? So now you're adding in a pandemic that especially at the beginning, no one knew anything about. Even me, bro, I had a fever. I went to the hospital. I thought I had it. I was worried about everything. Turns out I was negative, but for those 2 or 3 days, I was like, it screwed with me mentally. I stayed in my room. I was like, oh my goodness, I have it. I just gave it to my son. I gave it to my wife. Like, I can't even imagine what that is. Now, imagine you're putting in, you're living in a small confinement, right? So there's housing, you know, the space anxiety. You're living with your grandparents, your parents. You're living with, it's confined spaces. You can't go anywhere. Now you're also adding the fact that your dad or mom might have lost their job.
Yep.
Because of the economy. Now you're adding the fact that you're not able to go to school. So the pressure on you is higher because now you're stuck at home. Everybody's now watching you. Domestic violence has increased.
Yep.
Divorce rates have increased. Suicide has increased. And then the fear of being sick with a virus that you don't know about is adding on to that to a huge degree.
And you've also got, you know, sorry to interrupt, but you've also got a generation of children that have spent the early years of their life being told, you know, don't go near people, don't touch people, don't shake people's hands, you know, don't go within 2 meters of anyone, which is just, I feel like it's going to be crippling in the future for people in terms of exacerbating social anxiety if you've been raised in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? It depends how long this goes for. I mean, if it's a year or two, you know, it just really depends what happens. Like, I don't think really we can really know. But the only thing that we can know, and I think what we see with mental health is when you have a derailing moment in your life. So something that derails you massively, whether it's a divorce in your family, whether it's a huge loss in job, whether it's a relationship problem. A big derailment like this is what actually causes mental health issues, right? So, for example, the protests or last year, that's a huge derailment for a lot of these young people. Then you add in COVID, it's a huge derailment. I don't think we've seen the ugly side of our mental health yet. I think it's going to get worse. I think it's going to be worse for the next few years, because sometimes when you go through a derailment, you're so focused on that thing that your effects of the mental health don't kick in until later. You know, whatever that situation may be. For me, it was a divorce with my parents. You just go through it. You're so focused on what your current situation is. It's not until a year, 2, 3 years later that those effects come in. Right? Like you mix that with alcoholism, you're boozing because you're upset, you're pissed off, you're angry, you're drinking, you're doing stuff more, you're not looking after yourself. And then later on, those issues compile. My fear is, and this is because there's not enough education around mental health, is people aren't aware that they are heading down that track.
Yeah.
Right now, you seem like you're just so focused on what you need to do, and the anger, and like anger can mask everything, and like all this, you're thinking about the current perception and what life is right now. You don't know what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years, and I think that's when the mental health issues are going to get worse. And if people don't know that it's coming now, they won't know, and that's the scary part to me.
Yeah, because like you say, if people aren't educated and they don't know what the triggers are and what the warning signs are for things like panic attacks, mental breakdowns, then yeah, you're doomed for it to go too far.
Like Harry, just sorry to interrupt, man. Like you think about right now, one of the biggest problems is, and I know this because of going around and speaking to the local psychologists and psychiatrists, everyone's right now is fearful for their job. So if you're already fearing for your job because the economy is bad, you're not going to admit you have mental health issues because of the current dilemma of, if I tell them this, it's a weakness, I will lose my job. Yeah. Imagine trying to take days off to recover from your mental health illness and fearing that I'm not going to have a job when I go back. So that's not an option. That's the current climate that we're in.
Yeah.
Nobody knows how to do that.
Yeah. It's just a nightmare paradox to be stuck into. And you touched on it again, is that Hong Kong just seems to be taking a battering at the moment, because you had the protests, and it really affected me, even as someone who lived there for a year, and looking at it from a distance, but seeing the university campus that I spent so much time at and that I loved so much and have so many great memories of. I saw that turned into a war zone between the police and protesters. And for people that live in Hong Kong, that this is the streets and the universities and the areas that they grew up in. It's their home, right? And they're seeing them just descend into this chaos. And then you get hit with a pandemic, like you say. It's just so much to be dealing with at one time.
Bro, imagine you're 14, 15, 16 years old.
Yeah.
It's already a vulnerable time at the best of times.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's an age where you're like, for me, I have a huge amount of empathy for kids that age, because it's a vulnerable time, right? You're heading towards university. It's like you're moving on to a life that you don't know what looks like. And at the best of times, it's vulnerable. Now you add in something, like I was saying before, moments in your life that completely derail you are what's going to cause mental health illness in the future. And, for me, when I look at the protest, I looked at it from strictly a mental health thing. I didn't look at it from a political side of it. I just looked at it from anything in your life that derails you is going to cause issues in your life going forward. Now you've had civil unrest into COVID. Now you have these high school kids who are trying to get a degree, who aren't really getting a degree because school's out. They're not in school. Are they getting the best performance of what they can? Now, what happens to the people who are graduating? The economy's shit. Can you even get a job? What kind of job are you getting for? You worked all this life to get this degree, which now might be not useful. Plus, you've been dealing with a lot of these, like PTSD in Hong Kong right now for these kids is a real thing. Yeah. People think PTSD happens for army vets and stuff like that. Not true. So you're thinking about how many kids aren't even addressing their PTSD because they don't even know what it is. Now you're into COVID, where you're trying to figure out, do I have a future? I've been studying all this time, all this pressure to go into this university to try and get a job, which now I don't even know, does it exist? Who knows? You're adding that in with your parents might have lost a job. You don't know what the hell is happening. You start to get a tickly throat and you're going, I can't go home because I live with my grandparents. Like, what happens if I give them COVID? Like, there's no way to release it. And it scares me, man, because when I think about high school, bro, when we were in high school, you remember when we were kids, you only have two things that mean something to you: your home and school. Your life is in between there, your mates and everything, but that's your life. That's all you know. There's no, like, whatever, if you go outside, your parents know exactly what you're doing, or if you're not there, your teachers know exactly what you're doing. You're in this sort of, now imagine if one of those destruct, whether it's a family divorce or a domestic violence, or, it's no safe space now at home. You only have school. Now, with COVID, you can't go to school, so you have no interactions with your friends. So that's a destructive force. Now, what happens if you have nothing? What happens if you have nothing? So as a kid, you don't know what else there is out there. There's no other, your two safe spaces, your two things that you know are gone. Now what do? This is a crazy thing that I'm seeing, Harry. Like, I'm seeing teenage suicides, because they don't know where else to go. There's no other hope. There's nothing else for them. And that shit is fucking tragic to the point where it's ridiculous. And that's the shit that
and when you're that, and I remember being that age, and like you say, it's tough enough as it is because you haven't built up the arsenal to be able to cope with hardship. And also, you're flooded with hormones. Your future's uncertain anyway, because like you say, you don't know, are you going to get into university? Like I always say, 17, 18, when I was studying for my university exams, is the most challenging period of my life I've ever had. And it sounds silly to look back on it, but at that age, I didn't know how to cope with it. And for the first time in my life, suddenly my whole future was in the hands of, some exam results. And that was crippling for me. And that was when I had a very stable home life. Both my parents were employed. My school was open. All my friends and family were well. So, and it was hard enough for me then. And it's almost like if you wanted to invent the perfect storm, if you wanted to invent something that would, just completely derail people's lives, it would be this, right? Like you say, your home life is insecure, your school life is insecure, you can't see your loved ones, your support network is gone, your future hangs in the balance, and it's so uncertain. It's just, yeah, I fear for the future of this generation.
You think about as well, man, on top of that, you would have seen it, 17, 18-year-old, everyone's telling you, or you should theoretically know what you want to do for the rest of your life.
Yeah, which is absurd to start with.
Which is ridiculous, yeah. Right? Like, you're meant to know what you want to do for the rest of your life. Man, before this, last year, I had no idea I'd be doing this full time.
Yeah.
I'm 34 years old.
You're my inspiration, mate. You're the reason I'm back on the air.
No, mate,
it can be done. It can be done.
It can be done, but I didn't know this. I had no idea this existed. And who's to say in 2 years I could be doing something completely different that I didn't know that was happening? But you're meant to already have your plan out, to the point where if you don't, your parents will put pressure on you to be like, why don't you have your plan?
Yeah.
Why don't you have your future mapped? Like, you're falling behind. Like, the pressure, as you said, the best of times is shit at this age. Imagine throwing in a pandemic and a civil unrest where you're heavily involved in, and you're meant to be in this vulnerable state, and then heading out to, which is again what drives fear and what drives anxiety, is the fear of the unknown. We literally don't know what 2021 looks like,
no,
let alone 2022. We have no idea. We don't know what economies, what jobs are still going to be cut. We don't know what industries are going to suffer. We don't know what industries will bounce back. We have no idea. We're all just kind of hoping. I mean, that's fucking terrifying.
And like you say, from such a young age, your path is sort of laid out for you as a young person, in that you're told to go through these motions of, you go to school, you work hard in school, you get good results, then you can go to university, you can get into a good university, then you can get a good job. So the whole orientation of your life has been going in this direction. And suddenly it might turn out that what you've been doing for the past 10 years, 15 years, suddenly is not going to unlock these doors to you that you were promised, which is just
scary as that, right?
Yeah. Again, you're just having your future torn from you.
And I haven't even really added on to the worst part is you're having your future torn from you that might have been something you didn't even actually want in the first place, which is a whole different topic. In Hong Kong, there's a lot of people that are forced to do something that they felt was the right thing to do by their family, by society, of what they should be, quote unquote, doing, but might not even be what they wanted to do. And now that's being ripped up. Like, I mean, the I guess kind of the irony in that is ridiculous. Like an industry like being a pilot, you'd think is the safest job in the world.
Yeah.
Now, what do you do as a skill set of a pilot? It's not like any other airlines are hiring, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, whoa, but I got told I should be doing this because it's the safest. Like, I guess what I'm saying is it's just, we don't know what's going to happen. And I think that's really throwing a huge spanner in the works.
Yeah. And it's, it's scary being a teenager, being a young person, when you don't know what the future looks like and your friends don't know what the future looks like. But at least then you could have some trust that your teachers or your parents or people older and wiser than you had an idea of what the future looks like. But we're all just pissing in the wind, man. Like this, none of us know. Even, there's not even consensus within the scientific sphere or the political sphere about how this plays out.
And you can't even hide it anymore.
No,
bro. When we were at school, we wouldn't know because we didn't have access to social media.
You see a man in a suit and you think, oh, he's got his shit together, and now you realize it's all a front. It's just all a front.
Now if I'm 13 years old, I can get on my phone, I can go on YouTube, and I can listen to the world leaders about how actually we don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's it's nuts. One of the things that I when I work with some of the schools in terms of when we create the content is one of the things that I find with mental health is people don't also give enough credit, especially because I have a huge empathy for youth and passion for that, because that's what a lot of my stuff came from. But when I work with the students, I see so often that people go to the schools to tell the students what to think. This is how you should act. This is what you should do. This is how you should feel. And I was like, this is ridiculous. 17-year-old kids know, even 13-year-old kids are so well versed now and so researched in what they want to know that they know exactly what they want to talk about. We need to give them the credit that they are smart enough to have that discussion. So what we wanted to do was to actually have conversations and say, what do you want to talk about? What is it that's on your mind? And through that, you get higher engagement. And so that's something that I'm really passionate to drive, is the language of let's not tiptoe around these topics anymore, because the more we tiptoe it, the more not normalized it is, and the more things will happen. The saddest things that I see was when we have kids taking their own lives in school because nobody talks about it, because nobody wants this taboo. It's like, oh, let's not bring up depression because that might trigger someone. It's not how it works. That's not how it works. We need to talk about it like we would with physical health. It's not like by me talking about physical health, all of a sudden someone's going to get injured. That's not how it works. But you need to inform them of what happens when you do get injured. How do you recover from that? That's the key. And we're so well versed with physical health, bro. We tear our ACL. We have everybody telling us of exactly who we go and see. We have an exact timeline, to the point where I will post it on social media to be like, watch this space. I'm going to be coming back healthier than ever.
Yeah.
Nobody posts a picture coming out of a psychiatrist going, boom, watch this space. Just had a mental injury, coming back stronger than I ever have been. Why not? Yeah. Because that's the disparity of physical health and mental health, which is crazy.
Yeah. And that's the, the complete contradiction in Japan as well, because, I work in Japanese schools, and it is like what you said, you know, times infinity in terms of the Japanese culture is just, you do not speak your mind. You know, you put on your suit in the morning, you walk out the house, you know, you bottle up everything. You don't moan, you don't whinge. You're not a burden to anyone around you. You just suck it up and you get on with it. At the same time, the Japanese are probably as much in tune with their physical health and physical well-being than any other culture I've ever come across. In terms of people, like you say, people know how to keep themselves well. You know, they go to onsens and, you know, they bathe to relax. They all know how to just look after themselves, and they know the warning signs of when they're getting sick, and they know how to prevent it. And, you know, they're just so hot on keeping themselves well physically. But the moment someone even wants to try and discuss depression or anxiety, suddenly it's all just like, no, you're, you know, this isn't relevant, this isn't important, just get on with it, don't be weak.
Do you know, one of the things that I think about when I think about mental health is, in terms of like the way I'm excited to, if humans can think about it this way, is the ability to enhance performance. When you talk about that, and people are so in tune with their physical health, there's so much information, they will go above and beyond to enhance their performance with their body so that they can be the best versions of themselves. I'm looking forward to the point where mental health is exactly the same, and that we look at it as a way to enhance performance as opposed to being a burden. Because as soon as we can change that narrative of it to being about enhancing performance, I think then we will get this change in society, which goes, if you don't talk about it, it's weird, because now you're leaving money on the table. And I listen to, you think about, if you direct correlate with an athlete who's injured and they play with an injury, they're playing at 80%. They're never going to be performing at that top level. But imagine after the off season, they address their injury and they come back next year fully fit. They are playing with the shackles off. Yeah. Imagine if you're doing that with mental health. So then you're going, look, I've got an injury, but if I identify it, not only am I going to fix it, but I'm going to be even better than where I was. And my performance now is going to be better than everybody else because I've identified it and now I'm fixing it, which means now I'm playing injury free. Now, like, watch out now, because now my performance is going to go through the roof. And not only that, I'm going to start figuring out tools on how to build resiliency. I'm going to figure out how to build these tools so that I can become an ultimate performer at this top level. I was listening recently to he's like a hero of mine in the athletic field, as a UFC from New Zealand, UFC middleweight champion, Israel Adesanya.
Yeah, I know.
And Adesanya was, the reason I love him is because if you listen to his press conferences, he just drops the name of his therapist, and he drops it in conversation so routinely that it's part of his training. He just goes, yeah, I talked to my therapist about this. And it's like, wait, did he just mention he spoke to a therapist? And he drops it in so casually. It's such an amazing thing. Watch his interviews and how he talks about his therapist. And he talks about how he's developing tools to harness fear in a way which can benefit because when you get into fear, you go into fight or flight. When you're in fight or flight, your reactions are sharp because you're ultra alert. So how do you use that to your benefit? Because now you're acting faster, your reactions are faster. So using that to your advantage, and how to harness that energy is an optimistic way to think about, if I didn't have my therapist, how could I get to that point? And that for me is like he is the perfect example of how you can encourage mental health as a performance enhancing tool. And then once everyone has that mindset, then if you're a UFC fighter or anybody in that field, you're not seeing a therapist right now, you're leaving so much on the table. Then society will fucking thrive.
Yeah. And this is why it's so absurd that men especially are so reluctant to confront mental health, because we somehow have this idea that it's, you know, it's somehow unmasculine to want to talk about mental health, or you're somehow being a burden. You know, it's not what men do, when actually there's nothing unmasculine about improving yourself so that you are going to be, you know, twice as strong, twice as powerful at whatever craft you set yourself to. You are going to be achieving at such a higher level. There's nothing unmasculine about that.
Harry, mark my words. Once the narrative changes on mental health, men will be at the forefront. So once the narrative of mental health changes to the point where it's performance enhancing and you're not doing it and you're leaving something on the table, men will be at the forefront.
Yeah.
It's at the moment it seems it's a weakness. And men, we love to seem that we're in control. And whether that's in a relationship, whether it's in a job, you always want to feel that you're in control. It's a very masculine thing. Now, whether that's a good thing or bad thing, you know, I'm sure many people will say, yeah, that's the problem with men. And I agree, but that's the narrative. You know, whatever, however we think about it, men want to seem in control. And unfortunately now mental health seems like it's a weakness. Now, when the narrative changes and it needs people like Israel Adesanya to be at the forefront of these conversations. But once the narrative changes, I guarantee you, men will be at the forefront of the conversation. And, you know, women will look back and go, fucking men, right? We've been saying this for years and men have finally figured it out.
But when you think about it, how hilarious is it that you've got millions and millions of men who are packed into gyms because they understand that to be at my best, I need to exercise and I need to eat well, and I need to, you know, research and look into how I get the peak physical performance out of my own body. But then when it comes to mental health, everyone just goes, I'll be all right. I'll just let it be, you know, I'll just leave myself alone. Imagine if you had an athlete or, you know, someone who was trying to get the most out of themselves physically, who just thought, you know what, I won't bother with the gym. You know, I won't bother eating well. It will probably be all right eventually. That's basically what people are doing with their mental health, right? People, even though you've got people who are striving to get the best out of themselves, you know, they want to thrive in their workplace or they want to thrive at their studies. They don't understand that, like your, you know, like your physical self, you have to exercise it and you have to understand it and you have to know what its triggers are and how it works before you can get the most out of it.
Yeah. I think once we have that narrative change that everybody has it, so let's get that out of the way. Okay, cool. We've got that out of the way now. Now it's, why would you not want to have the best performance that you can? And I reckon what will happen is we will see people who have tapped into these resources excel. And like I said, you're playing injury free now. So you look at the likes of Israel Adesanya, who becomes the middleweight champion, and he's playing injury free because he understands his weaknesses and needs to improve his mental health. Now you take that from a fighting perspective or an athletic perspective into someone who's leading the field in whatever it may be, in science and whatever, you know, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can't lag behind now. I need to do that. That's when I think it'll get exciting.
So you almost have to unlock the kind of competitive streak that's inbuilt into men to get them to finally confront mental health.
That's what I reckon.
So I know this is a pretty huge question, but I feel like I had to ask you, which is, as someone, you know, you've had so much experience now with mental health and where the pitfalls are in society. If there was one change you could make in terms of, would it be education in schools or health services, or just the way we discuss it? If you could snap your fingers and make a change for the better of mental health, what do you think would be the first thing on your list?
For me, it's come from what I've seen. The number one thing I would like to see is the mental health awareness within families. And what I mean by that is the conversation that happens between parents and children, you know, that like literally inner circle of your family. That can on its own save so many lives. A lot of the people that I meet who are struggling with the most mental health issues always tell me, and it's a common trend, I wish someone would listen to me. And it's always directed at the immediate family, more often than not. And I think it's because there isn't enough education on how we speak about it and what it is. So one thing I would like to change is, it's not necessarily for the victim, but it's the people around them to understand what's actually going on, so that you can be the person that is not, there's a difference between hearing somebody and listening to them. Hearing someone, the difference to me is when you hear someone, it's like saying, how you doing? And they say, good. And then you move on. Listening to someone is actually caring, is actually hearing what they're saying, caring to the point where you're going to follow up with them because you actually care, or you've heard what they've said to the point where you're going, he said this. Now I can think about in what way can I help them? And that comes from families understanding what it was. I was super fortunate. And what saved me and what helped me was I had a crazy supportive family. Now, they had no idea about mental health, but they were like, what's going on? I want to help. I want to learn. And then now they're so well versed in it that we have these conversations that are so normal. But I fear, but I'm lucky that even though they didn't have the education, they wanted to find it out and they wanted to have that communication. The problem is, and I'm talking more for Hong Kong, is not only do they not know, but they're not willing to have that conversation. And that's what I would change. If I could snap the finger, it would be to have that communication, to want to learn how to want to learn more and figure it out. Because so often than not, it seems so simple, but the people who are really struggling just want to know that there's people there who are listening. That's the key, and are there to support. And when you have that, and you have a support system, actually mental health becomes way less daunting of a topic. It doesn't become this huge scary thing. The thing that makes mental health scary is when you're dealing with it alone. That's when it makes it scary, because it's a super lonely thing. And when you're dealing with the worst times of it, you feel so lonely. Now, when you have a support system that's there, who are just listening and you can turn to, it literally can save your life. And it's as simple as listening, showing that support, and being there for them to try and figure it out, as opposed to palming them off and doing something else. And that's when it gets bad and going, oh, I don't know how to deal with it. It's that acceptance of what it is, education around what it is, and just talking about it like a normal person. That's the one thing I would click with a finger and say, if I could change anything, it would be how the inner family, the inner circle can talk about these issues and be more educated on them, because it starts with that inner circle.
And just normalizing the conversation in the immediate family, because again, even, and like you say, with the lack of education, even as someone who had an extremely supportive family, just endlessly supportive, I think still to bring up at the dinner table the idea of depression or anxiety, I think you would see everyone kind of shy away a little bit and suddenly, retreat into themselves, because there is so much stigma attached to it. So yeah, I think that's just such a great point.
Really quickly on that, Harry, as well, things that are different seem weird when you immediately bring them up. So for example, and the more you do it, the less weird it becomes. So if I was in a group family and I never talked about depression, I talked about it, of course it's going to put people aback. But if you're talking about it for 6 months, it becomes so normal. This is not just with mental health. When we started wearing masks, the first day we're wearing masks, we're like, I can't breathe. This is ridiculous. I feel claustrophobic. This is I'm never going to get used to it. 8 months in, it's a part of your life.
Yeah.
You don't leave the house without it, right? But you think 8 months ago, it was so foreign, it was ridiculous. This is what I'm saying about mental health. Everyone thinks it's this huge topic that nobody wants to talk about. Of course it's weird when you first bring it up, but you start talking about it, talk about it every day. There's conversations around it. You get more research, you're educated. 2, 3, 4, 5 months down the road, 6 months down the road, all of a sudden, it's just being plugged in everyday conversation.
Yeah.
Right? I'm at the pub watching it, and then I turn to the footy. That's when it becomes normal.
Yeah, but I do feel at least in the UK, there does seem to be a bit of a generational shift happening. Is that when I went to university and I was living with people that were all my own age and sharing a house with people that were all my own age, it did become a part of everyday conversation. You know, I'm not talking about that we were just all wallowing in how terrible we were all feeling, but it was just, if someone was having a shit time, if someone was going through a bad week, if someone was feeling low, if someone was homesick, if someone said, you know what, I don't feel like coming out tonight because I'm feeling a bit anxious, you know, I'm just not feeling particularly, you know, extroverted tonight. It was just, again, it was as if we were talking about the weather or as if we were talking about the football scores. And it is so refreshing to live in that environment. So do you think it's not something that's going to happen overnight, right? This is something that takes generations to fix before everyone's comfortable. There seems to be a bit of a generational gap between people my age. We do seem to be getting better at creating an environment where we can talk casually about our mental health. Whereas I think for a lot of people who are older, they still see it as a bit of an alien topic.
Yeah, I think, yeah. And you mentioned an interesting point where you think it might take generations. I think originally it might have, but I think with COVID, and what I mean by a magnifying glass is, not only do I think it's made these issues come to light, it's going to make the recovery or the conversations move faster too.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, but I think it will get better quicker than it would have been, if you understand what I'm saying. Like, I think the peak, like the valleys will be sharper, but it will increase quicker because COVID's made us realize, and the key is with the youth, how important mental health is. Like with kids now at high school talking about it, you look at my generation, there was zero conversation.
Yeah.
And now you have kids at school who are literally not only talking about it, but are understanding how important it is because they're seeing what's happening with the older generation. So they're like, okay, we know we need to talk about this, and this has to be part of our life growing up. So you think about, that's only 15 years difference. And I think that's going to be rapidly increasing to the point where I think people will talk about it more.
Yeah. And like you say, I think for some older people, mental health was seen as a sort of indulgence for young people, right? But because of the pandemic and everything that's come with it, like you say, it's really put a spotlight on everyone. No one can escape this, regardless of how old and, you know, stoic you thought you might have been. Suddenly now it's not just something, you know, it's not just young people moaning or young people not being able to cope with life. Suddenly everyone's realizing that, you know, mental health is an issue and something we need to talk about and something we need to combat.
Yeah. And it just feels like a difficult topic because we don't know how to talk about it. But once it gets to the point of how easy it is to talk about like physical health, it will become less daunting and less difficult to describe and less difficult to cure and less, because now there's more research being put in it than ever. There's more exposure onto different types of mental health, the different types of abilities to help mental health, because if you have some issues that are genetic, you know, how can we go about it? Is it, you know, now I mean, hearing like shrooms are coming back because it's a way to like help with mental health. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, this is all happening recently. So now you think about the science, the technology, what's going to be happening in 20 years time, where you're not only just you're not trying to get back to zero. Everyone's going to have these incredible formulas of how to be like a crazy creative. You know, I don't know, don't quote me on this, but what happens if people find like shrooms are the way to like create even better movies, to have better scripts written, to have like a better imagination, to open up. I don't know if that's true. Maybe it's another thing that hasn't even existed yet. But that's when it's like, let's enhance our mental health.
Yeah, you're right. I think it's definitely going to be exponential in that once people start taking notice of this and once people realize that you can utilize this to enhance yourself, then there really is no limit to how far this could go.
It's exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's another thing as well, is that in the same way that we get excited about our physical health, right? You know, people want to look good. People want to feel good. People want to be able to lift weights. They want to be able to do well in sports. You know, I feel like that's a way that we should talk about our mental health as well, in terms of like, let's let's just not have it as this kind of awkward elephant in the room. Let's talk about it enthusiastically in something that we want to be good at and we want to sort of flex.
It's in our language all the time. You hear like, I want to see how far I can push my body.
Yeah.
I want to test my body to the limit. We hear like this challenge, like we always want to do that. With mental health, we just want to get back to normal.
Yeah. Everyone wants to be mediocre.
Yeah. And it's like, imagine if you did that physically. It's like, I just want to be walking again physically.
Yeah.
I'm so obese. All I want to do is just like not be out of breath. It's like, why?
But it's like, no, if you're going to the trouble of going to the gym to get back to, you know, a certain weight, why not keep going and get fucking shredded and start lifting heavier weights and get big? And yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And there was one thing, again, it's sort of the connection between the mental side and the physical side, in that obviously a lot of the conversation we've had has been about sort of ending the stigma and being able to have open discussion, which I think is really important. But I think another area where education seems to be lacking is actually the things that we do, our behaviors, and how we combat the problem of mental health. And I think everyone knows what's bad for their body. Everyone knows if they eat junk food, if they don't exercise, if they don't sleep properly, if they don't change their diet, then it will have a physical toll on you. Whereas I've heard so many people that talk about mental health and they're living lifestyles that are just not conducive at all to being healthy mentally. But we seem to have this sort of cognitive dissonance where we don't think it will affect our mental health. We know if we drink, we'll get a hangover, but we don't think about how that can lead to anxiety or depression, you know, further down the road.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you hit the nail on the head. I think it's about self-awareness.
Yeah.
But how do you become self-aware without education?
Yeah,
I think that's what it really boils down to. It's like, the more you know, the more you can be self-aware, right? Because your understanding of it is easier, right? I know if I sleep shit for 2 days in a row, my anxiety goes through the roof. Okay, so what helps me sleep better? Going to the gym, sleeping earlier, I don't know, not drinking, eating healthy. Yeah, I mean, to the little points of like, you know, how you want to end the night. You know, just your own routine that's going to make you realize, okay, I need to sleep better. It's the end goal. How do I do that throughout the day? But everyone's different. Everyone has their own routine, and it's about understanding what's important so that you can get the results that you want to get. And I think that's the importance of education. It all comes down to education, and it comes down to when you're educated and you understand it, everything becomes less daunting. And that's when prevention comes in, because then you're catching it before it gets to the worst possible point, because you're like, man, I know I'm not sleeping well. Or and which I love, and what stemmed the walking talk was now maybe once a week minimum, but maybe twice, me and my best mate, we in the morning before we go to work, we wake up early, and before we even check our phones, we do about an hour walk. And it's literally about walking and talking, but it's not about mental health that we talk about. It could be literally anything, but it's about emptying our mind. We could talk about sports one day. We might literally spend an hour talking about the NBA or footy or rugby, or one walk. It might literally just be venting about what stressful we had with our relationship or with what's been happening with work. But then you get to the end of it and you're like, oh man, I've been outside. I've seen this. I've had sunlight. It's in the morning. I go back now. It's like 8:30. I'm about to have a coffee, and then I'm about to hit the day. And I've already walked for an hour. I feel refreshed. Like, it's about understanding what you need so that you're releasing the pressure valve more often than not, and not bottling stuff up. And the more you do that, the more you are able to live and perform better. And I think that's a real key. Yeah. So you really hit the nail on the head. It's education to the point where you're so educated on it that then you become self-aware. And the more self-aware you are, the more you know what works and what doesn't. And I'm not telling people to like not drink, you know, but it's about understanding what happens when you do drink, or when you drink too much. How much can you balance, right? Live, you know, work your week where I work hard, I'm super healthy, but hey, I do want to have a few beers with the guys after work. You know, it's all about balance at the end of the day, and self-awareness.
And just putting yourself in situations where you have the opportunity to talk and get things off your chest. I think that's so important. I noticed that from being at uni and living in a house with 5 people or 6 people, where you know that whenever you come back from a day at uni or wherever you've been, there'll be someone in the house. And like you say, even if it's just venting, even if you just get back and just say, you know what, I had some absolute dickhead in my lecture who just kept piping up about this, just being able to get that off your chest, you kind of take it for granted, but it's so useful. And then suddenly I went to living on my own and I'm like, shit, suddenly I'm just bottling all this stuff up. And it wasn't
then you end up starting a fucking podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all just self-therapeutic. Like you say, I can't afford your services, so I have to get you on the podcast. But I had to realize that now I'm going to have to make a conscious effort to put myself in situations where I can vent or talk about my day or just get stuff off my chest.
Yeah, super important.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up there. So if you want to let the listeners know where they can find information about Talking Mental, you know, social media, how they can get involved.
Yeah. Look, you can, more importantly than coming onto our website or our platform is to literally, for me, it's encouraging people to go out there and start more conversations and be that kind of beacon in your social group. You know, like I think when you talked about when you were with your uni mates and having that ability to have those conversations, be that guy that starts it, because I guarantee you'll find people you'll become a magnet for people. They will be drawn to you.
Yeah.
And you know, I think once you realize that, again, 6 out of 6 of us deal with it, you will I encourage people to be that person that steps up and talks about their own issues, because vulnerability equals relatability. And, you know, that's the best way to talk with the audience. So I would just, more importantly than coming to wherever I am, it's like, be that person in your community, whether it's in your family, whether it's in your workplace, wherever it is. You'll be a better manager for it. You'll be better in your relationship for it. You'll always attract better people by being vulnerable. It's just the issue is, how do you do it? How do you talk about it? And I would just encourage people to do that. So that's the thing that I would really encourage everybody to do. Obviously, if you want to see what we're up to, please, you know, visit talkingmental.com. You can follow on Talking Mental on Instagram, and you know, my personal Instagram that you can find, Aaron Stadlin-Robbie. You know, if you don't know who to talk to, literally drop me a DM. It's quite interesting. I've had quite a few people who have reached out to me just on Instagram, and they've been like, hey, look, I've gone through some of the stuff that you've talked about. Do you want to have a coffee? And that for me is one of the biggest highlights. And I will meet every single person that ever messages me for a coffee, because I love that human interaction. And we end up forming bonds with people. And I've met some incredible people, and we just have this incredible conversation and just feeling like you're not alone. So be that for your community, be that for your inner circle, whoever it is. But if you don't have anybody, if you're feeling super alone, especially if you're in school and you have no other place where you can go to, drop me a message. I would love to hear from you. And yeah, stay tuned to our walk and talk, which I will, I'll let you know once that's out, Harry. You have to fucking plug that for me.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to it, mate. It sounds great. Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. And yeah, once all this nonsense is over, I'm on the first flight to Hong Kong, so we can have a few beers in person.
Bro, nothing would tickle my nuts more than that, more than knowing that you're on a flight over to Hong Kong.
I'll make it happen, I promise.
Oh man, that would be amazing. To be able to sink a few beers with you would be a dream come true.
Okay, well, I'm in the business of making dreams come true, so
that's what I'm talking about. Mate, I can't tell if you seem at home. I don't know if your pants are off or on, but it's
half and half.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, mate.
You're an absolute legend. And mate, anytime. If you haven't pressed record, we'll do this another time.
Yeah.
And or at any point, I'm more than willing to chat. So thank you,
Okay,
bro.
great. Yeah, we'd love to have you on again. All right, mate. Cheers. Take care.
Peace out.